Hey guys, I've got a quick update today on the Triumph 400X Scrambler that I added to the fleet a month or so ago. This will be available to ride down here in Devon back to back with the other bikes in this category, including the new Himalayan, although the new Himalayan has been delayed, allegedly I hear on the rumour mill, till May, so that's an interesting development. And curiously, the CF Moto 450 MT is coming out end of March, allegedly, again. So it's all to play for this year. And I know the Triumph has been compared to those bikes and every other bike in this sort of sub-47 brake horsepower class. But I think, and I'll discuss it in this video, I think it sits on its own, really. It's a very different bike to the others. For one, I think visually it strikes a very different chord. I think this is going to appeal to people who aren't necessarily attracted to, say, a KTM 390 Adventure or a Vogue or a CRF or a Himalayan or the CF Moto. You know, it looks a really premium product. It's amazing, actually. The best, I would almost say the strongest part of this bike is when you park it up and look at it. Now, that's not to do a disservice to the way it rides or anything, but there has been times when I parked it up, both today when I've been out on it and a few weeks ago when I was out on it, where you just park it up and you think, I cannot believe that's a 5,600 quid bike. It just looks really good. It draws your attention. It makes you turn back and look at it. So I think from a visual point of view, certainly first and foremost, it's a great success. I just can't help but admire the way they've managed to style this and also give it the big bike appearance. And it's when you sit on it, it's got a big bike appearance too. I think there'll be some people who'll find it a bit too tall. The seat does feel quite tall. You know, the spec sheet of what, 830, 840 doesn't really tell a true story. I think its lack of sag in the suspension means it actually feels quite a tall bike. It's as tall as, well, it's almost as tall as a CRF 300 Rally once you sat on it and the suspension's sagged out. Seat's quite broad as well, so it's definitely got a big bike feel to it, and I think 6 foot and above riders will probably be able to ride it just as easy as a 5'8" rider. I think it's different as well because it's got no fairing, and I think that gives a very different impression of a bike. You get a real sense of being at the front of the bike. You're not sat behind anything. Whether that's a good setup for people who wanted to buy this bike to go touring on or do any longer distance, I don't know. I mean, personally, I feel quite exposed not having any kind of screen, even if it's a small screen. It gives you some guardian against the elements, and you do miss it on this. I mean, for people who've toured before on a Scrambler style bike, I think they're going to be used to it. But I think riding it the last few days, or the times I've been out on it, for me it's an orbital bike. I'm going to describe what I mean by an orbital bike. You're never going to go too far from home on it. That's my impression. You're never going to go more than 2 hours away from home, just because that's its confines of where it feels its most strongest. When it makes you feel your most freshest, and when the bike feels the most freshest. On those quick 2-hour Sunday blasts, I don't think there's a bike in this class that are going to match it for sort of the excitement of getting it out of the garage, the excitement of blasting it down the road, and the excitement of bringing it back and putting it back in the garage and looking back at it. In a way, to me, this is a great replacement or an update of the Interceptor. Now, the Royal Enfield Interceptor sold really well to people who just wanted a Sunday bike. Not a lot of those bikes did a lot of miles. There's lots come up for sale with sort of 2,000 miles on it or so, you know, after 3 years of ownership. And I do get the impression that this is going to be that bike. It's going to be the bike that the people buy because it's not expensive. £5,600 means people can buy it. They can put it in the garage. They won't feel guilty if they're not riding it or getting the most out of it. They're going to be able to pay for it in cash, so they haven't got the PCP hanging over them. So I think as a piece of garage jewellery, it's top of the class in this category, it's certainly. And as I say, for me, when it's at its best is when you're parked up looking at it. When you stand back and watch it, you know, you're walking away to get a cup of tea, in Lynmouth, for example, it's a fantastic bike. What's it like to ride, I guess, is the most crucial part. Engine-wise, I think it feels like a diesel engine from the early 90s or early 2000s. And that might initially sound like a bad thing, but I think what it feels like to me is it's got lots of mid-range go, 4,000 to 6,000 RPM, picks up, goes really quickly, really effortlessly on the throttle. It feels gutsy, it feels alive, and on those back roads, it's always feeling like it's got power to give on the throttle. The throttle, ride by wire, feels crisp and juicy, and there's power there. Where the power starts to tail off is above 6,000 RPM, where it starts to feel a bit flat, if I'm honest. I mean, I am running this in, so I'm being gentle at the higher revs, but it just doesn't feel like you're chasing towards anything. There's not anything to aim for at the top of the rev range, which that might change once it's run in, but my initial impressions on the way they've geared this bike and tuned this bike is it's all down low or mid-range, which in fairness is probably where it's going to be ridden the most. It stands quite in contrast to the KTM 390 Adventure, which is quite rough and coarse and gruff in that similar rev range, you know, sub 4,000. The KTM it's always wanted to go, and if you're not riding it aggressively or progressively, it can feel quite an uncouth engine. This, on the other hand, feels perfect at those rev ranges, whereas the KTM starts to make sense above 6,000 RPM. So it's a very interesting change of dynamic to the KTM 390, which I'm looking at now. The KTM really excels higher in the revs. This seems to excel lower in the revs, so very different characteristic. It's more like the Himalayan. You know, the Himalayan's got this sub 4,000 RPM sweet spot, and this is a bit the same really. Which I think for people who are wanting it to potter and do modest speeds, I think it's going to suit them a lot more than a KTM or something like that, or a 310 GS. It's more revvy. I think where I'm sort of uncertain about it at the minute is the suspension tune. I feel like they've made it really firm, or more firm than they needed to, and I don't quite understand why. And I've read some debate where people are saying it's not too firm and others saying it is, but to me, on the back roads riding the A and B road, or the B roads where it's choppy, that suspension is just a bit too firm. It never settles, it's fidgety, it's actually quite harsh, and when you hit quite sort of sharp edges in potholes and things, it's very shuddery through the chassis. It just needs, to me, it needs a softer state of tune, suspension-wise, you know, to live up to that Scrambler moniker. It's great on smooth roads, but as soon as it gets undulating and choppy, that suspension just can't cope, and it's wanted to do that sort of budget characteristic of wanting to stand up mid-corner. When it hits a mid-corner crease or divot or rut, the bike wants to stand up, and you never feel like you can harness the full chassis potential or engine potential, because you're always having to back off for the suspension to deal with it. There's one stretch of road that I ride regularly, and on the KTM 390, you go at that, and it's a choppy, twisty, weavy stretch of road, and on the KTM it really goads you into giving it more and more. Like it asks you, come on, let's go, more power, and the KTM will float up there and fly up there really quick. This it's completely opposite. You're almost having to back off. It's having to, the suspension is saying, I can't cope with this, back off a bit, which is very different characteristic to the KTM, which is saying, come on, go. And I can see there where the £1,000 price difference is between the Triumph and the KTM. You know, fundamentally very similar bikes, built in the same factory. There's no reason for it to be £1,000 less. Should be same price, but you could tell it's in the suspension that they've saved the money. Interestingly, John at Rally Raid, who does the suspension for the 310 GS, he wants this Scrambler to do a kit for it to improve it. And you know, I think there is room for an improvement in the suspension, no doubt. Certainly for the more progressive riders, I think your average rider is going to be absolutely fine on this. I'm not saying it needs changing, but for the progressive rider who wants to push on, I think there's a lot more potential in the bike that's not being allowed by the suspension. Whether it's going to be worth throwing £1,000 in suspension at a £5,600 bike, not sure. That's the cost-benefit analysis for everyone to work on. But what I enjoyed about the bike today was the way it just flicks and floats. Okay, apart from the real choppy stuff, it flicks and floats along the B roads, and it actually is a very good transition bike. But what I mean by that is, if you're doing a bit of tarmac floating along, and then you turn on to some gravel or some dirt road, the transition from a sat down position to a standing position is really good. It really fits nicely when you start to stand up. It's got nice wide bars. You've got a good commanding position. Your foot position's good. Your knee position's good on the tank. It's a really good standing bike, really. So for somebody who's doing multi-surfaced travelling or local touring, well, I think it does that really well. I mean, obviously the tyres have got a limiting factor. They're not the best. And I actually think it could be those tyres that are just giving it a bit of a vague sensation and almost a heavy steering feel on the road. I don't know. I can't think what else it could be. Could it be suspension? Could it be tyre? Probably erring towards a tyre. So I'd be interested to see what it's like with maybe a knobbly, an Anlas Kappa X or a TKC 80 or something. But today I enjoyed the bike. It's easy to pick fault with it. It's a budget bike, and just because it's a Triumph doesn't mean to say compromises haven't been made in the production of it. Of course they have. They've had to bring it in at that price. There's a few gremlins showing up on this bike and on the forum. The immobiliser light illuminates when you first start it and stays on for a while. There's been a few people on the forum whose batteries have died or it's not started on them. So there's clearly a few niggling issues. Is that a deal breaker? I don't think so, because all bikes, unfortunately, go through a little bit of a development stage post-sale, and it'll be for the dealers at first service to rectify it. So I don't think it's a deal breaker. Who is it going to be? Who is it going to suit? Well, I think it's just going to suit people who want an urban bike or a backcountry bike, who's probably not going to do huge distances, but wants something really pretty in the garage that's going to get a lot of attention from motorcyclists and non-motorcyclists, which is cheap and easy to run. It's got a 10,000 mile service interval. It's going to have strong residuals, no doubt about it. So it's a really good, sensible buy for your average motorcyclist. There'll be people who want more travel or trail capacity, and there's bikes for them, whether it be the new Himalayan or the Vogue or the CRF. But I think that's a different class of bike. There'll be those who want more power, and they'll be sort of satisfied maybe with that CF Moto 450 MT or a 500X Honda or something like that. But I think for the casual, I'm going to call it a casual rider, and that's not to do a disservice to the people who are thinking about buying one, but to the casual motorcyclist, this ticks so many boxes, and the fact that it looks so pretty and makes you want to look back at it, I think that's a really strong, important element of a motorcycle. I mean, I've been testing that V-Strom 800DE, which, great bike. To ride it is fantastic, but there is no point that you'd park that up and look back at it in admiration. It just is not a pretty bike. And that's an important element of why we buy a bike, or why a bike speaks to us. So yes, I don't think the suspension is as softly sprung. I'd like more travel. You know, when did manufacturers reach this point where they thought everyone needs firm sporting suspension? No, you know, I've been blasted around on one of those CCM 230s that I've been selling recently, and on similar roads, that bike will flow effortlessly over the choppy roads, choppy tarmac. You know, and that's a cheap Chinese copy of a Honda 230. I'd love to see Triumph try and encapsulate the spirit of a true scrambler, a true dirt scrambler with this bike, which could have been possible. But I suspect what they had to do in making the street version with a 17-inch front wheel, they probably had to kneecap its upper potential as a dirt bike. The geometry and the components and things like that probably wouldn't have translated into a true scrambler. But the engine, I think, would do. If Triumph ever thought, let's make a proper scrambler with proper long travel suspension, maybe a 21-inch front wheel, I think it'd be onto an absolute winner. Because with the punch of the engine, the mid-range punch, it would be brilliant. It really would. But I don't know, why did manufacturers go down this road of sporting suspension, sporting performance? I don't know, but in a way, it slightly ruins or sours a bike's taste, certainly on the back roads, for me at least. But yeah, really good. So next up, I'm going to go out on the 310GS. I just had I had a puncture on it when I went to go out on it, so took the Triumph instead. These are just my impressions, my thoughts on these bikes. You know, everyone's different. That's why it's important to test ride bikes and, well, or just take a punt. I tend to just take a punt. But if you want a proper test ride, I will be putting dates up so you can come down and ride this back to back with the KTM 390 Adventure, the 310GS. And then for the more off-road stuff, the CRF and the Vogue and things like that. So, and hopefully a new Himalayan, if it ever arrives. May is a current forecast for the bike, so we'll see. Hopefully it comes a bit sooner than that. All right, take it easy. Cheers, mate.